There are 14 teams playing this weekend, and most of them did not get there by accident. When we look at teams like the Packers, the Chiefs, and the Seahawks, we look at good, complete teams that have good coaching, good front offices, and more often than not, winners. They all have elite quarterbacks, and all of those guys, Aaron, Pat, and Russ, all have winning attitudes and demand excellence not only from themselves, but from everyone around them. However, there's another quarterback who has the talent to be a Super Bowl champion one day if his team could be even remotely close to a contender. We are of course talking about Deshaun Watson of the Houston Texans, and as you can see by the title of today's video, he needs out of Houston. We're going to discuss potential trade scenarios, why he needs out, and where he could end up. Deshaun is a winner and is a great quarterback when healthy and when he has players around him to help. He's only 25 years old and is already a 3-time Pro Bowler and has now, after 2020, led the league in passing yards. Unfortunately for him though, he is in by far one of the worst situations in football, and it's not particularly close either when looking at other great quarterbacks. Now before we dive into Deshaun Watson's future, only about 39% of you guys watching the videos are subscribed to the channel, so if you do enjoy the content, please consider hitting the subscribe button as it helps the growth of the channel a lot and it would be very much appreciated. Now let's begin. So we begin with discussing the dysfunction of the Houston Texans and how they went from a division champion to an awful team seemingly overnight. Now obviously people want to immediately point fingers to the horrendous trade that then general manager Bill O'Brien made last year when he sent DeAndre Hopkins to the Cardinals for next to nothing. And while that is the popular thing to do or the main idea amongst football fans, this team is a lot more than just a number one receiver being traded away from being good. And no disrespect to DeAndre Hopkins, but a number one receiver does not take a team from winning a playoff game to the number 3 overall pick in one season. There is no better proof than that than the Arizona Cardinals with Larry Fitzgerald, who is one of the best receivers of all time, and there's been years where the Cardinals are absolutely awful and pick in the top 10, which is obviously not due to Larry's individual play. No. The Texans are a train wreck due to many reasons, but one of them is the strategy of trading 3 picks for an offensive tackle in Laramie Tunsil. And it wouldn't be bad if they were 3 picks like 2/3 and a 4th. Obviously they wouldn't get the player of Laramie Tunsil or the quality of a player that Laramie is, but when it's 2 firsts and a second, it's an awful decision. And it was awful at the time because giving up 3 for an offensive tackle with the team they had was not smart then, and it's definitely not smart now. Houston was a team that, had they kept building on what they had, they may have made an AFC Championship game appearance, as let's be honest, they were never going to beat the Chiefs in the playoffs. But instead of potentially getting there, they are as far from there as they possibly could be, as they don't have a pick in either of the first 2 rounds of the upcoming draft, and they were the 3rd worst team in the league this year. They have virtually nobody outside of Deshaun, Laramie, and an aging veteran in JJ Watt. Had this been a roster that was a piece or 2 away, then it would have made sense or at least been more understandable. But a core group of players, when they made this trade, of Deshaun, DeAndre Hopkins, Laramie, and JJ is not a Super Bowl caliber roster. Now, Deshaun should not demand the trade just because his team is bad, and it's not like I'm saying, oh, well, Matt Stafford should have demanded one 9 years ago because he was in a similar situation, and it's not like that. Not every quarterback on a bad team should just throw the towel in and say, okay, see ya, thanks but no thanks, because sports and life do not work like that. But if Deshaun were to say, look, I don't like my future here, I say this strictly as a business decision, but I don't want to be here and I am demanding a trade, then I would hope every sensible Texans fan could respect that and understand where Deshaun is coming from. Nobody outside of the Texans fan base would blame him either for demanding a trade, as at this point they are doing nothing but wasting his career. The future outlook of this roster isn't great, and as I was recording this, they hired Nick Caserio from the Patriots to be their next general manager. Now, I have mixed feelings towards this, because on one hand, Nick has been viewed as a prodigy for a few years, and the Patriots had denied teams of interviewing him before. Now, denying an interview one time for one position doesn't mean ex-coach or ex-assistant GM is a prodigy either, by the way. But Caserio has been viewed amongst high NFL personnel as a great candidate and the next guy for several years now. And good for him for getting his chance, but on the other side of the coin, the Patriots have not had a good draft in at least 5 years. Bill Belichick is technically the GM and head coach both, both, and you wonder how much draft say Caserio had in New England. Did Bill run a dictatorship where he just said, okay, I'm taking this guy, thanks for your input, but in reality, no thanks? And that's a question that I wonder. And this is a team, the Patriots that is, that drafted Sony Michel 3 picks before Nick Chubb, and a team that drafted N'Keal Harry in the first round and traded out of drafting DK Metcalf the next day. And not only that, but we've seen how head coaches have fared when they've left New England, like Matt Patricia, Josh McDaniels, Romeo Crennel, and Bill O'Brien. Will it be different or much of the same for when Patriots coaches and front office staff members leave to go elsewhere is a very valid question. And for Deshaun to trust Nick to not only give him a good head coach to work with, but to draft decent players with the little draft capital they have is asking a lot for a 25-year-old superstar in their prime. Now, having discussed this team, we look at what teams he could go to and which make the most sense. So we have to bring up Indy right away, as they have an aging Phillip Rivers, who probably will not be the starting quarterback next year. He may be, but after that, who knows? 2021 will probably be the last year of Phillip Rivers as a Colt. And because of them being in the same division as Houston, unless they would be willing to offer 1.5 to 2 times what other teams are going to offer, which by the way is extremely unlikely, they are out for Deshaun and will not trade for him. And while we are on the topic of trading Deshaun, you have to ask the question, what is the asking price, or what would be the asking price for another team to acquire him? And this is a tricky one because of how good he is, how young he is, and how rare it is we see a quarterback get traded, and an elite one at that. And over the past few years, we've seen the Jags trade Jalen Ramsey and the Raiders trade Khalil Mack. Other trades have happened, but those are generally the 2 biggest ones over the last 4 to 5 years. And each of those players got their franchises, or their former franchises rather, 2 first-round picks, which makes you wonder how much Deshaun's trade value is. It would be at least that, and then probably some after that. And with teams' futures uncertain right now at the quarterback position, like the Colts, and this is going forward by the way, the Colts, the Steelers, the 49ers, and several others, how much they'd be willing to give up is another good question, or another good point of discussion. And what is really interesting about this is, as I was recording, Pro Football Talk came out with a report that said, quote, "There's a growing buzz in league circles that Deshaun Watson could ask to be traded, and his new contract doesn't make that as difficult as you'd think." Now, I started recording this Wednesday night the 6th to be clear, and this video was coming out today regardless of this report, but this report does confirm what Deshaun should do. This team is in one of the worst situations in all of football with a 25-year-old prime quarterback, in their prime that is, and they have done everything they can to run him out of town. Their leading running back this year was a washed-up player that they acquired through the trade of one of the best receivers in the league. David Johnson ran for 690 yards and 6 touchdowns, while their leading receiver was Brandon Cooks, who had 800 yards in the first 14 games before erupting for 307 of yards in the final 2 games to finish with 1150. Now, Cooks isn't bad, but he's no DeAndre Hopkins, and everyone knows that. And Deshaun's contract is something we haven't discussed yet, but let's go ahead and take a look. It kicks in at the start of 2022, as it was a 4-year, $156 million extension. There is a way out after 2024, as you'll see on the screen now, but I don't think anyone would want to get rid of Deshaun if they get their hands on him as their franchise quarterback. But taking a look at some NFC teams Deshaun could go to, and we have to start with the Chicago Bears. Obviously, they get clowned all the time for Mitch over Patrick and Deshaun, but this would truly be a wild turn of events if they successfully traded for Deshaun after all of these years. Aaron Rodgers just threw for 48 touchdowns, and they have to be able to compete with them. Not only that, but don't expect the Vikings to be 7-9 next year, especially with how banged up their defense was in 2020. If Deshaun demands a trade, then remember, the Texans will trade him. And if he goes to Chicago, then he would have a true number 1 wide receiver again in Allen Robinson. Now, for another NFC team that could trade for him, and I'm going to preface it and say I think this is the least likely, but I still want to talk about them for the video. Tom Brady is 43 years old, and the Bucs are without a doubt going for broke trying to get a ring with him as their quarterback. Good for them, honestly, because a lot of other franchises didn't even attempt to go after him. But there is the possibility Tom retires, and if he does, Deshaun could go there. Again, I doubt it, but I did want to include them strictly for the possibility of Tom retiring within a month. And the last team we'll discuss is the Washington football team. Despite being 7-9, they're not a bad team. Alex Smith has played solid down the stretch, and when he plays, they're a much more respectable team. And truth be told, I think they will give the Bucs a game on Sunday, or Saturday, whichever day it is. Anyways, Dwayne Haskins is awful, and there's a reason he got cut rather than staying on the roster to get traded for at least a 6th or 7th round pick. Credit Washington for moving on from him now rather than later. But going forward, they don't have a quarterback, as Alex Smith shouldn't be viewed as the long-term answer, as he is 36 and will be 37 by the start of next season. And honestly, this roster is not bad. They would have Deshaun, Terry McLaurin, and the defensive line that will be dominant for the next several years. If they were to acquire Deshaun, which now by the way is very possible, they could be serious contenders in the NFC for the next 4 to 5 years. And with that being said, that's all I have for today's video. I hope you enjoyed, and I want to say I was 100% serious when I said I started making this video last night, and ironically, this report came out Thursday morning. Thank you, Mike Florio. Deshaun needs out of this mess, and he deserves better. Anyways, I'll see you guys next time. Please subscribe to the channel if you aren't already. If you're still watching, I appreciate the support and the time out of your day. Love you guys. Deuces. Peace.